Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Talking Success. We've touched on talent a few times during the podcast over the years. We had Time Bank on talking about sort of their structure and sort of what they're looking at. We've had a number of other fintechs talking about their talent strategy. But one thing we've not really discussed is the world of banking. And it's a very, very important part of the fintech ecosystem, as we all know. So when I was very humbly invited to go and speak at the Absa Exco offsite a few months ago in Johannesburg, I met a number of very interesting people, but I also met KG, who's with us today. KG runs talent basically for the bank. She looks at talent management and transitions, which I think is a really interesting topic, certainly around the transition side. So today we're going to touch on things like AI and the impact it has on workforce. We're going to talk about DEI. But there's another letter. The acronym's got a little bit longer in the Absa world, which we're also going to delve into. And I think this is more of a I suppose an insight into what happens or what's happening in the world of corporate. There's, I think, a lot of disruption happening across the world. We've seen a lot of retrenchments. We've seen a lot of right sizing of businesses that are now, moving people or replacing people with bots, with robots, and with AI. Is that a reality? Is that something that, as an industry, we need to embrace and we need to accept? Where is that balance between human and machine? Where does that come in? How does that affect countries such as us here in South Africa, where we do have high unemployment rates? What does that mean? How do we ready our existing workforce, your existing workforce, for work of the future, which I think is not necessarily the future. I think it's here now, and it seems to be evolving at just a rapid pace. It's almost impossible to keep up with. Every day there's a new product or a new release from one of the big AI companies. So that's my intro, a very long-winded one, but I'm going to hand over to KG first, so she can do a bit of an overview in terms of what her role is, because I probably didn't explain it too well, and then we can talk and get into some pretty interesting and topical questions. KG, over to you.
Thank you, Darren. Thanks for inviting me to your space, and it was lovely meeting you a couple of months ago, and quite interesting and insightful listening to you talking about the world of fintech and how that is disrupting the world of banking. It's top of mind for us, and I think it's been interesting just to see the many fintechs as well as other industries that are now starting to behave and sound like banks. So the lines, I think, are becoming blurry, and I feel sorry for the consumers, because they actually don't know who's who. From a product perspective, I think we're starting to all fish in the same pond when it comes to skills. So just in terms of my role at Absa, I've been with the organization for 12 years by end of the year. Okay. And I joined as a chief people officer in the corporate investment banking, and I've been in corporate investment banking for about 22 years. It's only the past 2 years that I actually decided to shift gears and try something different. And talent is something that I've always been passionate about, but also fascinated about, especially in today's world of work. I think it's really. I will use the phrase that my kids always use when it comes to a situation where you're never ready. So I would say that the world of work is actually showing us flames now as
flames. Okay.
So, human capital practitioners, you just don't know what to expect, and the evolution is happening so fast that we're playing a catch up position. So I've been in this role for 2 years now, and it's really looking after being the custodian of talent management. From succession planning, from talent acquisition, how do we attract talent into the organization? How do we develop them? Getting them ready, future-proofing them, making sure that they've got the right relevant skills. Performance management is also important. How do we enable them to perform? We actually going through a culture transformation now, and one of the things that we want to, we aspire to be, it's to be to build a high performing culture. My role spans across the group. We operate in 16 markets, mainly in this continent. 12 of them are in this continent. And it's something that has been exciting, and but at the same time, as I mentioned, with the world of work, evolving, it has also been keeping me on my toes.
So, we spent quite a bit of time at the expo session talking about the customer of the future. Can we just change that a little bit and talk about the talent of the future? I know that's a very broad sort of question, but from your perspective, from the bank's perspective, what does that look like? Let me phrase that slightly differently. So, if you were going to speak to, I don't know how old your children are, but if you're going to speak to maybe someone's going through matric or about to go through matric, and you were saying to them, look, you need to study, you need to prepare yourself for the future of work. What would you tell them to do? Where would you tell them to focus?
That's a good question, and I think it's something that is also topical. I mean, I guess when I think about the education and learning institutions, it will be silly of them if they're not asking themselves whether the curriculum that they have today is relevant and is actually going to enable, the organizations in the future. So I think we have to appreciate that, skills are becoming the new currency in this rapidly changing world. The rise of AI, automation, digital disruptions that we are seeing happening, it's forcing us to think differently in terms of, the kind of skills that we need to think about, or we need to start building. And not just as corporates. I think, as I mentioned, learning institutions need to think differently. Governments also need to think about the role that they need to play, to make sure that we build a future of leaders that are going to be able to respond to these challenges that I've mentioned. So if I think about Absa specifically, I mean, when we look for skills, we no longer go to your typical competitor. I would not go to a bank actually to go and look for people when we think about talent. We're going into the fintechs because we're thinking about the digital transformation. A lot of banks are actually going through a digital transformation. So you want people who have an understanding or even fluency in AI technology. So digital and technical skills are becoming very important. Things like your data and digital software. We are a bank, so cybersecurity is quite important. So that's something that we also driving. But at the same time, your hard technical skills are not enough. Just looking at the disruptions that we are seeing, the geopolitical disruptions, to be specific. I mean, that is also cascading into the the world of work. So your vocational and social skills are quite as important. So things like collaboration, your adaptability, empathy. We've just come out of a very difficult period during the pandemic, and that's something that is empathy is something that is quite important in a workplace. Critical thinking, as much as we appreciate the digital and AI skills helping us to solve things with speed, there's also a need for us to also invest in things like critical thinking, which is quite important. So I think you have to take a hybrid approach when you think about the skills of the future.
There's so many different tangents I can go on or off on this, KG. Honestly, I think one of the many that popped into my head was we're talking about the bank looking at different skills or different talent pools, not necessarily from the banking community, but more from the fintech. And I think that throws an interesting question into the mix, which is on the, I'm going to use this word lightly because I'm not a fan of this word culture because I don't think it's really a definable word. But when I think there is this maybe misconception that actually, banks move slow and banks can't innovate and it's impossible to get anything done. And, people from the fintech community are going, listen, that's kind of not what I'm used to. I'm used to working in these really agile, fast moving, fast paced environments where, we build stuff, we break it, and then, we fix it afterwards. Now, clearly with, governance and, being a bank, you can't necessarily go and kind of build something, stick it in the market, get it to 20 million customers and go, oh, sorry, didn't work. Or there was a lapse. So what are you using to maybe change that narrative and to try and, I suppose, attract the talent that maybe is very happy in that kind of environment? Because let's call it what it is. Absa is a corporate. It's a very large corporate. So how do you go about that?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question, Darren, and I think it's something that we also mindful about. And I remember having this conversation with my fellow colleagues, and we were talking about it from a point of AI, that AI is here, and just doing some reflection in terms of where Absa is at in line. Are we ready? Is the organization ready to adopt? And the conversation, went on to a point where we actually appreciated the fact that, one, we are a young organization, right? And when I say young, I'm talking about youth as in your mid-30s. So what we are seeing is a lot of our employees are actually fast-tracking their fluency in terms of AI and technology. And they are leaving behind, the older generation, and that is currently sitting at a middle to senior management. And the reflection points were around how do we then start accelerating our efforts in order for us to actually become that environment we are actually accommodating of a talent cohort that is already ahead of the curve in terms of AI fluency, as an example. How do we create a culture in an organization that would actually be able to attract that kind of a talent cohort coming to the organization? So it requires us to take a concerted effort in terms of shifting certain things, because we're dealing with a young population. It's about instant gratification, right?
Sure.
They don't have time to come in and go into an environment where there's hierarchy, and the decision-making tree is so long that by the time you get to a decision, the world out there, the likes of your fintechs have already moved on. They've already launched the product and so forth. So you are dealing with a scenario where it's a young talent that is really wanting to get involved. Number one, they say, involve me, right? Irrespective of the fact that I don't have much experience. Involve me because I'm going to bring a diverse perspective in how you look at things, but also the speed in which they're expecting us to make decisions. They don't have what's the word? They don't have the
Patience?
patience of actually waiting on us.
I'm sure.
And then because of the war for talent, we are seeing not only the fintechs, but even your traditional direct, competitors also taking advantage of that. If we don't make a concerted effort in terms of changing our culture to enable us to attract the right talent and also retain the right talent, we are going to be left behind. Yes, we are a bank, and there's a lot of governance that come with it. It's one of those highly regulated industries, but you have to strike a balance, and especially because we can see that there are lots of exciting things that are coming out of the fintechs, and not only the fintechs, by the way, even your telcos, and now we're starting to see your retail. I wouldn't mention the name, but there's one of the big retail houses that have announced that they're going to actually compete with us directly, so it's really something that is forcing us to think differently and reposition and repurpose ourselves as an organization, more so from a culture perspective. And in fact, we are going through that culture transformation journey at the moment. And one of the things that we are doing is to identify those frictions in the organization that are pulling us back and making us show up late in the market when it comes to some of the solutions and the products that we offer.
And it's interesting what you said. I think the fintech industry, certainly here in South Africa and definitely in Kenya, I can't speak for all of the countries, but certainly in those two, has matured a lot in the last decade since I've been sort of working in the African context. On the talent side, it's gone from we're going to be very cool and we're going to wear slacks and we're going to wear slops and we're going to go and stand at a conference with the presence of regulators and we don't care because we're a fintech. That shifted. That shifted a lot, certainly over the last 2 or 3 years, where again, in South Africa, as you quite rightly mentioned, it's very, very heavily regulated, one of the most regulated countries in the world. And there needs to be a lot more sort of focus on actually the professional side of fintech. This is no longer about, I'm going to go and create an app for my bedroom, and I'm going to roll it out and I'm going to get 1 million users. That doesn't work like that. As much as we'd love it to work like that, well, maybe not from a banking perspective, but that's just not reality. We were with the Reserve Bank a couple of weeks ago, wearing my FinTech Association hat, and talking around stablecoins. And this was a very, very serious conversation, but it involved we had banks and we had fintechs sitting together, talking together, engaging together, and it was quite amazing to see. Wind the clock back 6-7 years, every conference that I attended was all about fintegration and the banks versus the fintechs and the fintechs versus the banks. And I think that's actually come to a reality now. In terms of attraction, and you mentioned this, so you've got the attraction, then you've got the retention. Again, I think the whole sort of ecosystem has matured, and no longer is it about having a foosball table or having an espresso machine. I don't think that's a value add for someone. I don't think they're going to join one organization over another. But other than compensation, what are the other sort of pull factors? I really want to get onto the belonging in a minute, and maybe this is a nice segue into that. But what are the other pull factors outside of the monetary side?
Yeah, look, in fact, that for me, it's a hygiene factor, right? The monetary piece. I think for me, it's one of those things that they're non-negotiable. You have to sort that out, and then you put on the side. But they're no longer a differentiator, right?
Yeah.
The deciding factor for talent wanting to join organizations, first thing that they ask, they want to understand who you are as an employer. What's your stance? What do you stand for? It's all about purpose, right? And they want to understand, because if you can appreciate, Africa, I think they said about almost 70%, or if not the upper 60s percentage wise, it's youth, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they've got a different way of looking at employment. So you gotta be in a position where, number one, you're clear in terms of your purpose, what you want to do, and the role that you play as an organization. It's all about purpose over profit. So you start with your purpose, and then everything else will fall into place. And that's how we position ourselves as Absa. So to answer your question, you have to order. People are looking for flexibility. In fact, we are starting to see more and more people wanting to do more than just one job.
Right.
And they call it gigs, right? So you need to allow that flexibility. And it's interesting. I've just come out of a meeting now where we're talking about hybrid ways of working, right? And actually just looking at ways Absa from that perspective, and how is that feeding into our EVP, because that's something that we saw that a number of people preferred to come to work for us because of the flexibility that still exists, right? So once you take that away, you are obviously going to put yourself in a position where people are going to start questioning whether you are that employer of choice, going forward. So flexibility, and then the other thing that they're looking for is experience. People are looking for they're wanting to come into an organization where they are not boxed, by titles and by hierarchy. They want to get involved. They want exposure. They want to be in conversations where they can also influence the direction of travel. And we underestimate actually, how much they may not necessarily have the experience, but they certainly know. There's a lot. I mean, access to all these digital platforms. There's a lot of information, right? And we underestimate how much knowledge they have. All they're wanting is to actually bring that into practice. So I think we're starting to think differently in terms of how we structure ourselves, as well as organize ourselves in terms of ways of working, pushing the cross-functional teams to really encourage that kind of that kind of ways of work.
I imagine it's a challenge though, because whilst there may be that sort of upward pressure or pressure from kind of the workforce that's coming into the organisation or in their 20s, 30s that are kind of pushing that pressure up. At the top level, at senior management level, exco level, they're not going to be. Let's call it what it is. They're not going to be in their 20s and 30s, right? They're going to be sort of tail end careers. They can be career bankers that maybe need to sort of shift their mindset as well. Is that an uphill battle? Is that something that you feel actually, because of the time and the effort that you and the Absa team have put into talent and how important it is, that you're kind of winning that war, as the war for talent, but you're kind of winning it internally as well?
Yeah, look, I think for me, you can't. So there's a role that we play as a function, as a human capital, function in terms of bringing that thought leadership and best practice in terms of how things need to be done. At the end of the day, talent comes into an organization because of a manager out there, a leader out there who's a talent magnet, right? They are being attracted to the organization because they want to work for a particular leader. So there's a lot of work that we do in terms of shifting the mindsets and behaviors from a leadership perspective, because they are the ones who are going to attract as well as retain. Right, so we can have all these beautiful, good things, that we talk about in terms of what needs to be done, but at the end of the day, the leader is the one who actually plays a significant role in terms of one, creating that culture that is inclusive, even from a generational perspective, but inclusive also in terms of thinking different perspectives, right? Um, it's not easy, especially because I think the speed in which the world of work is evolving is actually quite scary. So we are dealing with legacy issues. We are dealing with leaders who are so entrenched in a particular way of leading and managing teams, and that has to change.
I can only imagine the kind of challenge that is in a group kind of the size of Absa. You mentioned sort of the diversity side. I do want to talk about that because again I do some research before these calls, and I know that there was a survey run internally a year and a half ago or so. And if I'm not mistaken, 68% felt the workplace embraces diversity and fosters belonging. Right. So again, my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong here, or my research hasn't quite hit the mark. But rather than a DEI strategy, you've now got a DEIB strategy, right? Which is the B is belonging. Talk to us about that, because there's a lot of companies that have mission statements and values, and these days probably most of them are created through ChatGPT or something. But that doesn't work in the way of a bank. I've got to know how kind of banks operate over the last few years, but better than I have done in my entire career. But where did that come from? What does it actually mean to people?
Yeah,
Belonging. Can you
yeah.
describe it?
So it's actually not, it's not a new concept. It's something that globally there's some other companies or even countries or continents that are very much focused on the DIB.
Yeah,
I think there's history to us perhaps only focusing on DEI because it was very much pushed from a compliance perspective,
sure.
especially in South Africa because of our history.
Hmm.
And we felt that, there's one aspect of doing it, which is from a compliance. And I think we've been on that journey for some time, but we wanted to be deliberate in terms of, when we talk about the DIB, it's not just from a numbers perspective. We wanted it to be a driver that, we're going to be pushing aggressively in terms of um, really shifting the way we are seen, the way we are felt, the way we are experienced. And belonging for us, it brings that human element.
Mm.
It brings a human element. It brings, as we're driving collaboration, as we're driving, this human-centered culture, belonging for us. We felt that it was a very strong, not just a word, but it's something that is lived by. We want people when they come into the organization, they can actually feel it. It's similar to when you talk about a culture, right? The smell of the organization is when you walk in, you can actually feel it. It's belonging. It's exactly that. It's something that it can only be described through experiences. When people tell their stories, they can actually bring that out in terms of how they feel about the organization. When they form part of teams, you are included. There's one aspect of it, but the belonging, you do feel part of the family. It makes you feel like you're part of the family, if I can put it that way. So for us, we're not just talking about transformation, the inclusion piece, but we're actually mobilizing it with intent and purpose.
So, someone many years ago gave me a really good analogy, and it was around DI, specifically around women in fintech, and diversity is about sort of inviting people to the dance, but inclusion is about actually asking them to dance with you. And I thought that was always stuck with me for many years. It was,
That's it.
Nadia, I'm
That's
giving you a
it.
shout for that because that was yours, not
Yes.
mine. So.
Yes.
Okay, I think it's important though that there has been obviously because of history, and it happens in other markets as well. It's a bit of a tick box exercise. How many of this do we have? How many of this do we have? How many? But where you gel it together, and where you actually include people, and you take into consideration different ethnicities, different religions, different upbringings, different ways of life, different education, and you
Mhm.
get people in a room, and you get people in teams and squads that can actually think a little bit more sort of holistically. And I suppose from a bank perspective, given how many sort of different types of customers you serve, that's really important.
Yes.
Really important.
Look, let me, Darren, I think I'm going to share with you just to give you a flavor of our DIB strategy, right? And as I mentioned, we want to move beyond compliance and really, focus on the experiences, people experiences. You touched on customers. It's also important, right? We want to make sure that when a customer walks into your branch, they can actually feel that this is a place that I can trust.
Mm.
I'm being treated with respect and dignity. So some of the things that we've actually included as part of the strategy, we've got a piece around people with disabilities as an example, and we've got a piece around generational diversity. I think I touched on that, and with a focus on youth.
Mm.
We also focus on women. We've got a number of programs that we are driving that are actually empowering women, not just internal as in where we are, creating commercial roles specifically for women. I'm talking even in terms of the role that we play in the community when we think about your SMEs, right? We are intentional in actually funding the youth, youth-owned businesses as well as women-owned businesses. We've also have, we've been driving the diversity of thought and neurodiversity, which is a very, it's a new concept. And it's
Yeah.
something that we are we are pushing hard because we want to make sure that, that we're not leaving anybody behind. Obviously, every time, I think that's also another evolving space, right? So every time as you think that you've got it, then there's something that emerges that you also need to make sense of. I'll give you a proof point. We've just been recognized by Forbes as a globally top 100 employer, best place to work for. But we've also gotten a second accolade to that, as the best place for women. And last year, I think we came 323rd position in 2024. This year we came 66th.
Wow.
And and I actually spoke to the guys at Forbes, and I said, it's great to see that we've made progress, but I needed to understand what were the themes that were coming out. And it's really just, the concerted effort that the organization makes in terms of, as I mentioned, a lot of sponsorship and funding that we do externally. It's quite deliberate and focused on those, populations, as I mentioned, but internally as well. It's not something, it's when we say that we are inclusive and we want to create an environment, a sense of belonging. There are things that we are doing specifically for women to ensure that they feel that they are part of the journey. I'll give you examples. When we have meetings, we decided that when it comes to meetings in the morning, we need to be mindful because a lot of women, most of them are moms, and they're dropping off kids in the morning.
School, sure.
It's a school, so try to accommodate and have your meetings, mid morning or during the day, and same applies to after hours. Where you used to have a boys club, they talk about. If it's not a particular sport, before they go into a conversation, just be mindful that you may talk about something that is not necessarily inclusive of, other groups. And so it's things like that really just go a long way.
And by the way, there's no sort of funding going on for this podcast. But what I will say is, I had the pleasure of meeting your Exco team, who are diverse. Not only sort of roles that they carry out, but everything about them was diverse. I was very, very, very pleasantly surprised. I didn't actually know what I was walking into. It was probably one of the hardest sessions I've ever run, but that's one for another day. The people I've met over
I've
the
just
years.
remembered something. Sorry,
Yeah,
Darren.
sorry, go on, yeah, please.
Something. One of the pillars that we have on our EVP, or employee value proposition, it says "come as you are." Now that says a lot.
Elaborate on that a little bit. Come as you are. What do you mean by that, though?
It doesn't matter who you are, you're welcome. This is an environment where we actually are inclusive, irrespective of your background. And I guess it speaks to that diversity of thought, right? Just in terms of how people see things. And it's more saying, we've created a space that is safe, and you're more than welcome to share your thoughts, and no one is going to frown upon you. So I think for me, the come as you are is really just being more from at a personal level. You're not going to be judged.
Wow. Oh, that's it's incredible to see. I think there's so many takeaways. Honestly, KG, I can go on for hours on this, but I appreciate we're kind of almost out of time. There's been quite a few takeaways. If I'm going to summarize, probably the single biggest one for me, maybe for the fintech industry. So anyone that's listening here, is there's another competitor. There's someone else after your talent pool. This is not just about your competitors, your local competitors, your other fintechs who are operating in the market. We've spoken a lot about the sort of remote brain drain, or the physical brain drain, from South Africa and other parts of Africa going into other markets, and other markets sort of paying dollars or whatever it may be to attract talent. But had you considered that the banks are now looking your talent as well. Something very interesting to kind of keep an eye on. Something we've spoken about at length, certainly over the last 6-7 months, is this. Who's going to win the battle? Not necessarily for talent, but who's going to win the battle for banking? In South Africa and in the rest of the continent, there's been a lot of talk about the fintechs. There's a lot of talk about the telcos. There's now the retailers, as you quite rightly mentioned. And I think the one of many things that I took away from conversations with you and the team was, I wouldn't bet against the banks, and I wouldn't bet against the red one. If I was a gambling man, which I'm not, I would probably put some money on the red. This is not financial advice, by the way. Please don't anyone make any investment decisions based on what I'm saying. But I think the banks are, have the advantage over fintechs in two ways. One, they have the balance sheet, and secondly, they have the time. So for a bank to be able to sit there and go, actually, we're going to see what's happening in this market. We're going to see what's happening with AI. We're going to see what's happening with blockchain. We're going to see what's happening with cross-border payments. We don't necessarily need to rush into this. We've got great teams who are looking at this. I know, Rob and the team in the blockchain side very well, and they're the incredible job, and with Ripple now, and amazing, right? So. I think I would kind of, just keep a BDI if I was a fintech on what's happening in the world of banking, because there might be some surprises. KG, before we sign off, any sort of passing comments? So there's going to be a lot of people listening to this from within the fintech industry, from in the community, in banking as well, who may be sitting there going, look, I'm kind of okay. I know what my role is, and I've got my future planned out, but maybe I'm a bit worried about my kids. And let's be real. We all look after our kids. That's kind of our priorities in life. What advice would you give them to give to their children? Because it's ever evolving. No one knows what's around the corner.
Yeah. Look, Darren, thanks. It was a great conversation indeed, and I agree with what you've mentioned earlier. I think just to give people some sense of comfort, I think the employers and the banking industry, I can speak for them, having been in banking for a long time. I think we are shifting in terms of how we see ourselves. We see ourselves as part of a wider ecosystem. One that connects, as I mentioned, the youth. I think the youth is the leadership of today, the entrepreneurs. If I think about the role that learning institutions need to play, and I spoke about the government, I think we need to start really connecting and partnering and collaborating in terms of solving for, some of these challenges. I think partnership with the fintechs, it's something that I see us actually getting into, so that we can actually make the cycle bigger in terms of solutioning, right? And we do have a challenge, I think, as a continent. We are lagging compared to other markets where they are ahead from an AI perspective. There's a lot of infrastructure that we need to put in place. There's a lot of legislature that we need to obviously think about, because I think you need to take that, balanced approach from an ethics perspective as well. So I think there's a role that we need to play as a bank, as a banking industry, but certainly for me is we are investing not just in people who work for Absa, but it's in the future of the African talent as a whole. So there's definitely great conversations that are happening, and some of those will manifest, whether it's from an education system or from an employer perspective. But we are certainly starting to collaborate to solve to future-proof our children.
And I think that's a really good note to end on. Whilst I think we both, and we all, anyone we speak to is kind of very embedded and loves the industry, financial services, fintech. We do need to look at the future leaders, as you mentioned a few times. Look at our children, look at our children's children. None of us have got crystal balls. I think had we sat around this table 10 years ago and talking about what AI could do, we would probably be laughing at each other. But that is the world. That is where we live. There's innovation happening every minute of the day, across all corners of the planet, including our continent. And it's an absolute privilege to be involved in it. KG, thank you so very, very much. I usually end off by saying, if anyone wants to find out more about the business, have a look at the website, but I don't think I need to do that here. I'm pretty sure anyone listening who knows who Absa is. If you don't, then, just Google it or stick it into ChatGPT and you find it pretty quickly. KG, thank you so very, very much. I know it's a crazy time of year, and I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.
Thank you so much, Darren. Just as a reminder, Absa is the home of Africa's top talent.
There we go. Absa always gets the last word. All my guests always get the last word. KG, thank you. Lovely to see you again.
Thank you so much. All the best. Take care.
You.
Cheers. Bye.